21 will now begin.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Jackson. I am the chair of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission, and I'm going to call this meeting for February 16th to order. I want to welcome everyone joining us this weekend. I'll note that we have remote participation by members and staff as authorized by Minnesota statutes, section 13D.021, due to the declared local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify our quorum. Casey?
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
Commissioner Sarah is excused. Commissioner Crockett.
Aye.
Commissioner Jacobson.
Aye.
Commissioner McGuire.
Aye.
Commissioner Pino.
Present.
Commissioner Sparks.
Present.
Commissioner Sylvester.
Present.
Chair Jacobson.
Chair Jackson, present.
Jackson, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum. At this time, I'd like to recognize Heidi Ritchie, Policy Director to Mayor Jacob Fry, and Jared Jeffries, Mayor Fry's Policy Aide for Public Safety. I believe Ms. Ritchie would like to formally introduce us to Mr. Jeffries, who will be the primary point of contact from the mayor's office with our commission. So Ms. Ritchie.
Thank you, Chair. I am so grateful to be here right now, and I am really happy to introduce Jared Jeffries. He's our new public safety aide in the mayor's office. And, you know, I've been coming to these meetings for the last couple of cycles, and I'm just so overjoyed to have him here. He has experience in legal work and policy work around the public safety area, and I will let him introduce himself a little bit more, but I have to say I'm just overjoyed that he has joined us and really want you to utilize him as a resource. And I know that there hasn't been a lot of connection in the past with the PCOC, and I want to make sure that you all know that he is willing and ready to be a resource and a connection for all of you to the mayor's office.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. As Heidi said, my name is Jared Jeffries, and I actually am a transplant here from St. Louis, Missouri originally. And prior to this role, I worked as a judicial law clerk at the Missouri Court of Appeals. So that's where my legal background comes from. And before that, I graduated from the St. Louis University School of Law and University of Missouri School of Journalism and Political Science. So as Heidi mentioned, I have worked in the legislative branch of government before too. I interned for the St. Louis Board of Aldermen in St. Louis as well. So if there's ever anything that I can do for any of you, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and welcome, Mr. Jeffries. I think we all are looking forward to working with you in the coming months. Next, I would like to recognize City Clerk Casey Carl for an introduction of our new clerk, Lisa Brock.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Lisa, if you'll activate your camera just so you can introduce yourself in this virtual environment. I'm very pleased to introduce Lisa Brock, who is the clerk being assigned to the Police Conduct Oversight Commission from the City Clerk's office. You all remember that we took over the meeting management functions for PCOC this year. Lisa joined our office just in January. So not only is the clerk's office new to the PCOC, but Lisa is new to our office and the PCOC. But she joined us after serving 11 years as a policy aide in Council Ward Office 1 with Councilmember Wright. So, you know, she is used to be doing all of the things that those council offices doing, which is essentially running a small business. She's highly organized, has a great network, knows the city structure, knows the key contacts, obviously has good contacts on city council, and is familiar with the structure of city government. She's very organized, highly detail oriented, will be a great resource, very capable resource to this group. So I'm thrilled to be able to introduce her to you and you to her and sort of pass the baton on. I'll still be helping her, but Lisa will be the primary point of contact going forward for all of the meeting management and support functions for the commission. So I wanted you to have a chance to formally meet her. She'll be conducting tonight's meeting and going forward working with Chair Jackson in terms of getting those agendas put out for you. Thank you.
Lisa, you like to say anything?
Just thank you for that introduction, and I feel it's a privilege to be able to work with you all. So I'm looking forward to this upcoming year. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a great introduction, and we are so looking forward to working with you, Ms. Brock. We're really especially grateful to have you as a part of the team as we restart this commission and get things, especially our new members and new staff and partners all focused on shared priorities. So I think you're going to be particularly valuable to us as we go forward. Thank you again. The next order of business is the acceptance of public comments. I will open the floor and invite comments from the community. We are going to limit the public comment period to no more than 10 minutes with no more than 2 minutes per speaker. So with that said, are there any community members on the line who wish to address the commission?
Madam Chair, it's Casey. As this open piece starts, I just want to acknowledge my role in this. When we created tonight's agenda, it was with the idea that this was simply an orientation of members. I take full responsibility for that. So we did a public comment section, which is under the bylaws, a regular part of your meetings. So members who are on the phone, they are muted now. If they are here to speak, we would need them to press *6 in order to unmute their microphones. And then please introduce yourself so that we can record who's making that comment. So again, my apologies for that mix up in the error, and then proceed now with the public comment period.
Okay. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the commission this evening? You have 2 minutes.
Hello, this is Dave Thicking, if I may. Because I saw there wasn't public comment on the agenda, I did not prepare anything, but I think I welcomed all the commissioners at the last meeting. And I did at that time. Am I on here?
Yes, sir, you
Okay.
are.
Yeah, okay. Yep. I did at that time offer the services of Communities United Against Police Brutality to do an orientation or any part of an orientation or any information that we could provide, particularly to the new commissioners. So I'm sorry to say that that offer was not taken up. It never has been in the past, and I hope that maybe that offer still stands. You know, that we would be happy to do that and to provide a perspective that comes from, you know, a different perspective than you just get from the staff, which is part of the reason why you have the public invited to your meetings and why we have participated all these years. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. We appreciate that. Any other comments this evening for the commission? I thought I heard someone's line open up. Is there someone that would like to make a comment?
Hi, yes, this is Chuck Turchik. I didn't prepare any comments either, but now that you raise it, I did notice on a 2 or 3 page document that dealt with your orientation, there was some reference to city sources that you could rely on. And the last one, I think, was the city attorney's office. It said you could request legal, first it had to do with legal issues, and then there was some other item. But I would call to your attention that at a recent city council meeting on December 13th of 2020, a direction to the city attorney's office was passed, and I'll read that now. I just brought it up in emails that I think I have sent you. Directing the city attorney's office to consult with the Police Conduct Oversight Commission in work related to police department policy improvements. I think that is far broader staff direction than the 2 items that were listed on that 2 or 3 page summary of your orientation. So I just wanted to call that to your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public this evening that would like to make a comment to the commission? I think I'm going to wait another 60 seconds or so and then close this portion of the meeting to give anyone a chance. You will need to hit *6 to unmute your phone. Okay, maybe not 60 seconds. Okay, well, if there are no other members of the public that would like to comment, I am going to go on and move forward on our agenda. And I want to thank Dave and Chuck for their comments tonight. We always appreciate your participation. So moving on, colleagues, as we discussed at our last meeting, given the major changes in membership as well as with our new and continuing staff, one of the first things I wanted to do as our chair was to provide an orientation that would create shared understanding among all of us on how this commission came to be at this particular point in time. Your vice chair, Commissioner Abdi, and I have worked with our professional and administrative staff to develop this orientation. And I'm hopeful, very hopeful actually, that this will allow us to draw a firm, clear, and permanent line in the sand, so to speak. So putting the past behind, keeping the best aspects of prior iterations of this commission, eliminating things that don't work, and then coming together with our elected officials and community, will identify gaps that we need to address. That is my intention with this with this orientation tonight. This is essentially like a reset opportunity for us. The staff has done a huge amount of work to help set us up for this success. So I really invite you all to fully engage and participate in this process. With that, I'm going to ask the staff to facilitate this part of our meeting so that I can fully participate in it along with all the rest of you. So to start, I'm going to recognize Andrew Hawkins and ask him to open this orientation presentation. Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair Jackson. I'm just in the process of getting that shared with everybody so they can see. All right. Can everybody see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, as was just alluded to, we put together a orientation to kind of go over some of the, the background, the roles, responsibilities of various oversight bodies in the city, and we've actually brought in two former members of the PCOC to kind of facilitate this and provide, the subject matter expertise for any questions or comments or inquiries that the PCOC might have. So with that said, I'm going to get us started here on the first couple slides, and I'm going to hand it over to Director Jafar, who will help moderate the rest of the orientation. So. Really quickly, just to kind of go over some of the things like I just did that we're going to be going through. We have an introduction. We kind of go into the history about, the OPCR, the PCOC, sort of how we got here. We have the role of the various oversight bodies in the city, the purpose and function of the PCOC. We're going to discuss the research and study process, the PCOC subcommittee overview and functions. At that point, we'll be at the end of that section of the training, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to provide a Q&A session with the former chairs, the former chair and vice chair of the PCOC. To kind of answer any questions that perhaps weren't touched on during this, or elaborate on something where you might have some additional questions that they didn't get to. Following that, we have the PCOC partners, which is the city attorney and the city clerk, and they can speak to kind of their roles, and then Minnesota Data Practices Act, open meeting laws, and the ethics training portions to kind of round this out. So, all right. So really quick, just to get us started, the OPCR leadership and structure as it currently stands. Our director is Amani Jafar. She's been with OPCR for 5 years. She's 16, again, you can read a lot of this, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but prior to joining us, she had 16 years in legal practice. She's also an adjunct law professor at the University of Minnesota. I think she can kind of speak to more of what brought her to this position as we kind of continue in the training. when you look at the structure on the right side, as of today, OPCR has 7. The dark blue are the ones, the staff that we actually have on hand right now. The ones that are in that lighter kind of teal color, those are ones that are either posted right now or we're hoping to build out and post and hire in 2021. So we currently have a complement of 7, including the director. OPCR is divided into 2 main functions. One of them is case investigation and the other is analysis and support. Right now we have 2 case investigators. And then we have 2 intake investigators. The intake case investigators are responsible for 100% of the intake of complaints in the city of Minneapolis. Their job is to basically do the preliminary investigation. A lot of times people file a complaint. They might not know the officer or the jurisdiction that the officer was in. I mean, a good example is right in front of Minneapolis City Hall, you have, a light rail stop. And so if it's, transit police or it's somebody different, there's an interaction that somebody doesn't like or thinks there was something that was problematic, they file a complaint. We don't have jurisdiction over, that's over the transit police. So that's something that, they would take the complaint, start to review it and sort of figure out, if that wasn't the right person, we'll refer it to the correct agency. Or if it was just, if it was an MPD officer and they just didn't know who it was, we can go look through dispatch logs and figure out who was where and sort of, work backwards to fill in some of those gaps. So the intake investigator basically is prepping all that kind of preliminary, data to figure out, like the who, what, when, where. And then that's what's going to go to the joint supervisors to move forward at that point. So cases that go forward to more formalized investigation, that's where our just regular case investigators come in. At that stage, we're going to see more of the, the interviews with officers. That's the more deep dive into everything that's happened. Significant review of all of the body camera footage that's attached to the case, and then to jump over to the other side, our analysis and support. Right now, we have 1 body-worn camera analyst, so they're responsible for kind of again reviewing all of that body camera footage that might be tied to a certain event. Sometimes that's going to be to identify who was present or identify an officer that might not have been known to the individual that filed the complaint. They also will review the body camera footage of any other officers that were on location, just in case there's anything that, that perhaps was missed in the initial complaint. They have the ability to flag other potential violations as they're reviewing the footage. So it's something that there's definitely quite a bit of value in. The program assistant, they do a little bit of everything. So they do a lot of support for our review panel in terms of making sure that they're setting up their meetings. They're kind of that administrative support staff for the entire division. So there's a big load on them. As of today, we have 2 positions that are posted. We have 1 case investigator position that I believe closes next week or early next week. And then we have 1 video analyst position that closes midweek next week. After that, we're hoping to do a second round of hiring and bring on another case investigator and another video analyst. So that would bring us from 7 to 9 to 11, which would be by far the most staff that we've had on site. And also goes a long ways towards kind of balancing the investigators between sworn and civilian, between us and internal affairs. So I think that's something that we've kind of targeted as a goal of ours. So with that said, I think that kind of covers our current layout, landscape and layout. Obviously, the former chair and vice chair can speak to this as well, since they're familiar with our structure. So can Director Jafar, and I'll also be present for any potential questions. All right, with that said, I think I can turn it over to Director Amani Jafar and let her kind of introduce our guest panelists and get this section started.
Good evening, everybody. We are really fortunate to have both the former PCOC Chair Andrea Brown on the line with us. Andrea, can you unmute yourself?
You're on mute, quote of this year, right?
Hi. There you are. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. And our second panelist is former PCOC Vice Chair Jennifer Singleton. Jenny.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you both so much for joining us. So I would like each of you to start just to talk about the length of time that you were on the PCOC and maybe just to tell everyone why you decided to do the work in the first place. So Andrea, how about we start with you?
Yes, hi. I'm Andrea Brown. I am the first chair of the PCOC. I started since inception. A little bit of why I got into it. So I'm a Ramsey County public defender. I've worked in Ramsey County since 2009, clerked for a judge, and then I've been with the PD's office in law school and now working there. I moved back to Minneapolis and wanted to get involved here. I really like policy. I do some work on the legislation with legalizing marijuana and oddly enough, right, oversight. So I was interested, looked at what was available, saw saw the PCOC and dove right in. It was a brand new thing, and I like navigating new areas of law. So that's kind of what attracted me to the PCOC. Oh, you're on mute.
And thank you. Look, I just did it when you did, long day, right? I was going to say, I know Andrea brings 100% to her work because we were public defenders together at the same time for a short period of time. We had to overlap. So thank you so much, Andrea. Jenny, would you do the same, please?
Yeah. So my name is Jenny Singleton. I also go by Jennifer and Jay. But I was interested in the PCOC. I'm kind of the civil legal aid counterpart to Andrea's public defender background. And in my current role, I work with an organization that tries to kind of do more system-wide work around increasing access to justice. And that's some of the same reasons that attracted me to working with the PCOC, is that I saw it as an opportunity to kind of approach police reform and making police services in our city better from a systems-wide approach, and looking at what are the policies and procedures that are creating problems for our residents. And then I also saw it as a nice complement to, like, the activism that's going on within the city, as just like another angle to tackle the very deep systemic problems that we're facing, because I think we need to take all approaches. And I'm personally like a little bit more quiet, kind of like to nerd out on the analytic side of things. So I thought that was a way that I can contribute to some of the serious problems that I was seeing.
Well, having worked with both of you since 2015, I can say that I think one of your great strengths was the different skill sets that you brought and how you brought that to the commission and kind of took the things that were your strength and worked with it to make a lot of change. So what I would like to do is, I'm not going to read through this whole timeline, but what's up right now is just a timeline of the start of civilian oversight in Minneapolis. And it starts in 1990. But what I was hoping that our guest speakers could talk about, because you both were present during the big transition that happened from the Civilian Review Authority over to the creation of not just the Office of Police Conduct Review, but also the PCOC. Wondering if you could talk about kind of your impressions during that time and how it was like to onboard as a new commissioner, and any other context that you think would be helpful for our new commissioners just starting this work.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll jump in per usual. So I can't see everybody's face because the presentation is up, but I'm just imagining that you are all smiling at me just as I am smiling at you. I really get geeked about this stuff. I love it. Part of the learning curve, right, is we had to establish ourselves. We started brand new. So what I will say is jumping on board the initial commissioner group set, right? I didn't know anyone. So my leadership style is that I met with everybody individually, asked them why they were interested in this, kind of my vision. I said, I'm navigating in the dark. So I'm a team approach type of person, right? I'm going to use my advisory council. I'm going to be talking to my vice chair. We really need to be hand in hand. So what I learned is one of our commissioners on the initial the initial commissioners was Michael Weinbeck. And Michael Weinbeck happened to be the former, I can't remember, chair or vice chair of the CRA. And so what he explained to me when we were in our one-on-one meeting was, he essentially said, this is how I see why the change happened. The change happened was because when it was the CRA, right, everything was together, the panel and the policy. And the panel really focuses on individual cases, right? That's that case summary. I mean, I know some of our meetings, we talked case summary for hours, and then sometimes we had nothing to say. It just depended on the case. And there's so much interest in the case that the CRA was never able to get to the policy portion, right? It was always trying to find some solution for that individual case. And so it's always case by case. So there's all this backlog, right? And then with all that backlog, the civilians aren't getting aren't getting any type of response. They feel nobody cares, right? So it was not a working system. So what I understand what was created is this hybrid system, which I do got to give a shout out that we finally got recognition for. It's very, very great. And I'm happy to talk. I know that some of Mayor Fry's people are here. I'm happy to talk about why it's such a big deal that we finally got this. But I will caveat it there. But so they could never get to the data portion. And the data portion is what is needed because I think, as most of you know or are finding out, the way that we get money for these programs and the way that we continue to help civilians be able to come here, right, and have public comment every month and be able to say, hey, help me. And we'll get into that later with the co-responder model. But you know, we need to have and provide that data, and the CRA could never get there. So with the hybrid model, we were able to parse it out, and PCOC really focused on that data portion. And I think I've said it a million times, Jenny, and you can let me know if I have said it too much, but I really said it's not that I didn't personally care about individual stories. I do. I wouldn't be a public defender if I didn't. But in this context, this is the policy portion. And if I know that I need policy paths and I need backing, I need the data. I can't just come with this one story. I need to come with this stack of stories. That's why we, as a commission, focus on, you know, any type of pattern or any type of pattern of complaint that we see. That's why our red flags should go up. So I will leave it there. I'll let Jenny jump in.
Yeah, I think just to build off of what you were saying, Andrea, you know, we were able to see every month you review 3 case summaries, and we were able to use that to spot patterns of different issues that we were seeing, and then identify, you know, what additional data do we need to understand the root of that problem, and then what are the policy changes that we can recommend to help start to resolve those problems. So I think we'll get into more specific examples later on, but that was a really powerful tool for us. Hopefully you can't hear the blender running in the background. My partner making dinner. So we were able to both do that and then also respond to community groups and individual community members who came to us with issues that they were seeing. So for example, we worked with Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid on some housing issues that they were seeing that had intersections with how police were enforcing certain issues. We had a very active community member who came to us wanting us to look into how police were responding to calls for help that involved somebody suffering mental illness, and what are some approaches that we can take to make that experience less traumatic. So I think having a board that's solely focused on those policy issues and really digging into that information is really helpful, both to have somebody who has an eye on those patterns and then also to have somebody who's a board that can receive those requests from individuals and from community groups.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think it's what we have right now is a slide up that kind of shows the 3 different entities. One of your former colleagues actually moved over to the police conduct review panel because she was kind of ready for a change of role. And I appreciate the kind of difference between individual, like looking at cases versus kind of bigger policy recommendations based in data.
Yeah, I would say, and I think I've said this to a lot of commissioners, because I know early on, and I know Chair Jackson, you are the chair. I can't see you, but I'm getting nods that yes, I'm correct. We had a lot of overturn, and as the chair, especially as a newly done commission, I was very concerned. I do have to say a caveat here, and I'm just going to say it because nobody's my boss anymore, right? I am very sad to see that the commission did not retain its ability to have the chair appointed. Not that Commissioner Jackson wouldn't be appointed, but I think that this is a commission that needs that extra bite. I knew as a commissioner, right, my goal, especially as the chair, was to be neutral, and I said it numerous times. This community may not like some of the things that I say or the decisions I make as the chair. And the police may not like some of the decisions I make as the chair. That's my role, right? My role is to be here and have each piece move a little bit closer to each other, to be that bridge. And I know a lot of we went through a lot of commissioners early on, and Jenny can attest that, because initially they wanted to be here because they thought like, oh, this is the part where I can actually hold police accountable for the criminal act, right, that I know that they're doing. And I had to explain it, and sometimes it's just not people's jazz, right? Like HR portion of police complaints is not everybody's thing. So that was a hurdle for me. So I would always suggest, like, if your thing is not numbers and data, so that when you go to city council, you say, hey, this is why we need the co-responder model fully funded, right? This is why I will go to city council and say, I have no idea why you stopped giving us money for this. This was an amazing program that started ground up, which I will explain to you guys later, because I'm so proud of it. But that you go there with the data, right? Because then you, like I said, you have that stack of here's 700 complaints exactly the same, or 50 complaints exactly the same versus this one complaint for this one person.
Yeah.
And I would encourage them. I said, hey, if you're interested in the cases, look at the panel. Maybe the panel's a better fit for you. And I know for like Commissioner Westfall, that was a better fit for her.
Right. We have a question from Heidi Ritchie from the mayor's office. Heidi, did you want to go ahead and ask your question? I thought I saw her hand up. Okay, well, we can keep going. I think this is all just like really good background, because it takes all of the different pieces to work together to make the whole. I do want to emphasize, though, that none of these three bodies have any ability to make discipline. That's not just Minneapolis. That's in the state of Minnesota. That is state law, and you'll find that around the country that's true as well. Why don't we go on to the next slide here? So this slide is the actual ordinance, which we ended up rewriting in 2017, which Andrea and Jenny participated in, to make sure that the commission used to have a ceiling of 7 people, and we took that off so it would have room to grow. The other thing that the 2017 amendments did too was make sure that we had data access that was codified and wasn't just an agreement between the PCOC, the OPCR, to have access to data to do that important high-level policy work. Just in looking at the ordinance, and from remembering your work, Jenny, are there things that you think that are key features of your functions of the ordinance that you came back to a lot during your work?
Yeah, I think the data was the key to me, and the power to do research and studies. It sounds a little bit boring, but I think that can have some bite. If we lived in an ideal world, somebody could tell us their experience and everyone would believe that, and we could take action based on that, but that's not the world we live in. And so, unfortunately, for better or worse, we have to get the data to show that this is a pattern that's happening. And I think that data is especially important for the decision makers who are in power, and for governing bodies. So that was really the core to me. And just as an example, one of the first studies that we did was looking at when MPD was making investigative stops. So when they were like, oh, something looks fishy, so they're going to stop somebody, run their ID. And what we found was that in almost no cases were the police documenting anything about that stop, except for what was automatically recorded from what they were saying to dispatch. And that was really problematic because we saw consistently in the case summaries that people were filing complaints because they felt like they were being racially profiled. And because there was no data, those cases couldn't go anywhere, because the way the system is set up, if there's no data, and this was before body cams, then the preponderance of the evidence, the police win. So all those cases had nowhere to go, and we didn't have the data to say whether or not that was happening on that kind of official level. So I spent 2 years meeting monthly with, at the time, Assistant Chief Rondo, being when are we going to start collecting this data? And he'd be like, it's coming, it's coming. And then finally, we did get that data. And because of that, the ACLU was able to come out with a report that did show that there was racial profiling going on, that Black folks were being disproportionately impacted by these types of investigative stops. You know, a friend of mine who used to work in Hennepin County Public Defender's Office, she was able to take that data that was then publicly available and show some other disproportionate impacts that were happening. So getting that data to light, being able to influence MPD to collect the data in the first place, and then to make sure that it gets out to the public, I think is really, really important to trying to make some of these changes.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think, you know, I know just because the three of us have had many conversations about frustrations with the Minnesota Data Practices Act, about limitations on information. But I think that, you know, it's great to hear your stories of the work and how we've been able to work collaboratively to take what we can give out for good. And big policy, you know, big changes that happened during both of your time with the PCOC. I think this would be a great time to move on to the next slide, which I think starts talking about the projects, because I think it's just great illustrative example. We do, before we move on to that quickly, so Jenny mentioned the research and study. This is the ordinance language that establishes your research and study. I think everyone involved in this process felt that it was important to have it codified so that they had the ability to do that. The PCOC research and study process manual is also online and has all of the detail for people who are looking to see the nuts and bolts. So why don't we go to the next slide? So Jenny, you had mentioned the investigative stop study. Andrea, is there one on this list? I mean, you had mentioned mental health. Would you like to talk a little bit about the co-responder?
Yes,
Yes.
I talk about the co-responder all the time, and obviously you see I get geeked. I'm truly genuine when I talk about the policy and my love for the work that we have done with the PCOC. So I just want to say, Chair Jackson, I really appreciate what you said at the beginning of this. I'm letting you know I have not followed what has happened since I didn't ask for reappointment and left the PCOC. I went to have a baby, and I had a baby during COVID, so I have been focused on my family. So I don't know what has happened in the past, but I appreciate your sentiment. And I'm hoping I can be an open vessel for all of you. Like I said, including the mayor's office and whoever is here. I know Chuck and Dave are on the phone. Hi, guys. Because I'm so passionate about this, because I still do interviews about all the work that we have done on the PCOC and establishing ourselves. And I just gave an interview about the co-responder model because I truly 110% believe in it. And you can see, like, I'm getting passionate because I remember the day that the woman came to our meeting. So point blank, our first meeting and the first couple meetings were rough. I didn't do Robert's rules, so I was learning Robert's rules. It was a whole mess. I didn't understand motion seconding, all of that, right? So it was a hot mess, and Mr. Fussy had to help me through it, but we got through it, right? And I established an air about us so that we could just keep it rolling, right? And so we were at a meeting that was going, you know, we had established ourselves, we had gotten some things under our feet. And we had this woman come in, and she said, I said public comment, and this is time before COVID where we could all be together. She wrote her name on the piece of paper, and, you know, I said her name and come up. And I usually cut people off, right? If you're rambling too long, I'm gonna cut you off. I didn't cut her off at all. And Jenny, I can't even remember. I feel like she talked for maybe 15, 20 minutes. And all she did was come to us and said, I have nowhere else to go. Nobody will listen to me. I'm scared to death that my family member is going to die at the hands of the police because this family member has a mental health illness. And I don't know what to do. And I'm telling you and the great thing about the commission is because if the commissioners on that panel, this is their vested interest, right? You jump on it. That's what you get to do. And I can tell you that Commissioner Singleton and Commissioner Westfall, along with all of us, after she was done telling her story and telling us every avenue in City Hall that she has been to, right? She had been to NAMI services. She had been to Wilder, right? She had been to the courts. There was no one to really help. Commissioner Singleton and Commissioner Westphal took a vast interest in this. A motion was passed immediately, I believe by both of you, to do a research and study on this. And I know I'll let Jenny go into more information on how she got it set up, but it literally started from one community member bringing this problem, right? Talking about, here's my ideas, here's the work I've done, getting at the table, right? Essentially, she was able to come to the table, sit with Jenny and Laura, and like I said, I'll let Jenny go into who they all met with. And we got the co-responder model. We got $500,000 from the mayor's budget, and it was Mayor Hodges at the time. And I can tell you, Mayor Hodges had Nicole Archibald came to every one of our meetings. I had monthly meetings with her and the mayor, and we had monthly meetings with Rondo and Chief Harto at the time. So we, you know what I mean? And they weren't all, let's sit down and talk. Like most of the meetings, I was yelling. I was like, why aren't you doing this faster? I'm a volunteer and look at all the work we're doing, right? So it's not always fun. I want people to know behind the scenes, I was yelling. And Jenny can attest to that too. But the co-responder model, I mean, we got money for it. It was proven to work in the districts that it's, you know, that we got it to work in the wards that we got it to work in. We finally got it fully funded. And like I said, I haven't been following things. All I know right now is that it's not fully funded and that it's essentially gone, and money has been moved to rebuild something that was already there. My frustration is that nobody came to talk to me. Nobody came to talk to PCOC. Nobody came to Commissioner or Chair Jackson and say, hey, you have a co-responder thing. Tell me about it. And she can say, I have no idea. Talk to Andrea Brown. That's my biggest issue, is because essentially we're leaving the community with nothing. The community had something that we had built, and now they have nothing. So I will step off my soapbox and let Jenny talk, but I'm so passionate about it because that is that proves, our hybrid model works, but also the community relied on us. And now my fear is the community has nothing right now.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that, because, you know, on your end, the way that project started, I think, is such a good example of how the PCOC and OPCR work together, because you were in the community doing the work while we were collecting the data. And not only did we collect the data, we got in touch with other police agencies across the country, because I was the director. I was very new at the job, but I was on some of those phone calls where we heard from other states about how they were doing co-responder. And, you know, there were all different examples, and it was kind of a, you know, this is what, knowing Minneapolis, like, here's a proposal we can all put together. And you're right, you know, a lot of the work that we don't talk about day to day is those intense negotiations. It's cultivating data and negotiations. And, you know, for me, it's negotiations on individual cases and negotiations on the bigger policy work, because that's where the real change gets made. It's spotting those trends and issues for me, whether it's in case screening or it's working with all of you and hearing from the community, because I do remember that woman, and she was extremely compelling the entire time. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Jenny, on this list, is there a study that stands out to you that you recall working on and what it meant to you?
Director Jaffar's case. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
there's a question here.
Commissioner Sylvester has raised his hand.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just real quick, Andrea, John Sylvester, Commissioner. I work as a paramedic for HCMC. I have seen the co-responder model work personally firsthand over and over and over again. And thank you so much for putting that into our city and putting that kind of in our toolbox for people. I've seen that turn lives around. I've seen that personally de-escalate situations in just amazing ways. And you know, the fact that they're not necessarily running the way they used to is pretty disheartening. So mental health response and public safety right now is kind of my number one goal for being here on this committee. And so I'm really excited to hear more from you and to have more conversations with you about the work that's already been done. But more and more importantly, thank you for giving us that tool.
Well, I appreciate that, and definitely let's talk offline. I saw a message come up, but for whatever reason, my computer is doing the round circle thing. But I know people have been asking for my information. I will give it to the director, and she can announce it when the time is appropriate, if that's okay, Chair Jackson.
That is fine. Thank you.
And we'll make sure to go through the proper channels. We have a wonderful clerk working with us, Lisa Brock. So Andrea, do share that with me, and then I will make sure that the clerk has that information. No, this is great discussion. This is really exciting to get to join past and present, kind of, is what we're doing today. So Jenny, with that, was there a project that stood out for you that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think the evictions and calls for service project. We talked about the investigative stops project, which came out of reviewing the case summaries. We talked about the officer interactions with mental health issues, which came out of a very dedicated and active community member, Kathy, who was wonderful to work with. And then the evictions and call for service, that came out of Mid-Minnesota Legal Aid approached the PCOC and did a presentation about the way a particular ordinance was being enforced. And essentially, there was this ordinance called Conduct on Licensed Premises. And what was happening in actuality was if a certain number of police calls came from a rental property, that would trigger this ordinance, which would then trigger a review of the landlord's license and require the landlord to go through I forget the terminology, but like a performance improvement plan. And that plan often emphasized getting the tenant to move out. And so a lot of times the landlord would be strongly encouraged to issue a notice to vacate, and that tenant would leave. And this was really problematic, especially for folks who are experiencing domestic violence, for example, who might be calling the police for their own safety. That circumstance could trigger the ordinance, and then that person would not have an official eviction, but would basically lose their housing. And Legal Aid was seeing these clients come in who were getting these notices to vacate because they had called the police, or the police had been called. There were even instances where, like, somebody, I think, lived by a bus stop. And so that address had been used for police calls for activity happening at the bus stop, but then it was associated with that rental property, and then that tenant was being asked to leave. So we were able to do a research and study on that problem and actually get the ordinance changed. And we brought in a working group with representatives from Legal Aid, from the community, from I think the mayor's office and city council to rework that ordinance, and then also look at some of the practices that were happening. It turned out that the police department was very heavily involved in landlord training, and so a lot of these landlords wouldn't even want to be issuing a notice to vacate to their tenant. They would want to continue that relationship, but they felt like they had no choice, and that they would lose their rental license if they didn't get that tenant to move out. So that was a situation where by running the data about what was happening, and we found instances of like illegally requiring people to move when they had called for domestic violence. It was also having a chilling effect on folks who were overdosing, where they wouldn't want to call the police because that could endanger their housing. We were able to get that ordinance changed and then also get the practices changed as well, to really look at like the whole streamline of how that ordinance was being enforced. So I thought that was one of our successes, and actually one of the faster results that we got.
I loved that project so much because I was a housing attorney at Legal Aid, and I had worked with clients on the back end of that, and it was impossible. And it was a really systemic problem. And I wrote most of that report because of my background in housing law. And one really surprising finding that I think shows just the power of data and connecting the enterprise. so many other departments were starting to work on it, but didn't know how to go. And the PCOC ended up being the glue that allowed us, as interviewing people as part of the report, to go in and actually start to get all of these groups together. So that presentation was probably my favorite one that I've ever done as city council, because we went in as a group, and surprisingly, the police department had no interest in training landlords. And they said, well, we've just been doing it because they handed it to us and we've always been doing it. Please tell us how to make it stop. And it revamped everything. And, so what ended up happening was everybody wanted to change. Nobody knew where to start. And because the PCOC picked up that project, it changed everything. And I think, Legal Aid is still saying that it, was a wonderful project, and they're so glad it happened. And, I think that year there was a lot of impactful projects. The domestic violence response study, which was one that was carried by the two of you, and is one that is near and dear to my heart as well. Global Rights for Women, who is our community partner, just got a grant from the Minneapolis Foundation to continue that work. And they're going to be doing regular auditing of domestic violence reports. And yeah, I know, isn't that really exciting? So, Jenny, it was kind of like the nexus between these two projects, but she mentioned the domestic violence victims. Well, they have protections under state law. They should never be losing their housing. So, it was such a good, it was a project that was born out of another project, essentially. So that's the power of data. Even if you don't have everything that you want to start, even if you can just get you're the high level view group, and there's a lot you can do with a high level view.
And also, I just want to, if I can jump in on that, a lot of stuff that we took care of that we didn't need a research and study for, right? I remember, I think Jenny, let me know if I'm wrong, and I'm trying not to curse, but I remember telling Heart Toe, I don't understand why her officers cannot stop swearing at the people that they're arresting. As a public defender, I am not constantly swearing at my clients who happen to be maybe in the same manner that they were when they were being arrested. I mean, it's very easy to stop swearing, but I know that is like the number one complaint we got. I don't know if you're still getting those complaints, but to me, that's something very easy. I don't need to do a research and study to say stop swearing and using swear words when talking to somebody, even if you're arresting them.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, that is so true. So wonderful projects. You can see that in these links, we have PDF links to all the individual projects, but everything is on the Police Conduct Oversight Commission's webpage as well, including past case summaries too. I know there's been some discussion here. So if you haven't really had a chance to do a deep dive on the website, I really, really recommend it. I think we can go to the next slide. How about this is just the overview of the subcommittees. Each of you served on subcommittees. Andrea, do you want to talk about just briefly serving on a subcommittee and what that experience was like for you?
Sure. I will say, I know that the rules and governance, I don't know what happened. I did something to my computer. I'm sorry. I can only see half of the screen, the slideshow. But I know I was on probably a lot of committees, because at that time we were only 7, so we had to double up. I know the rules and governance only got together, it was initially like a standing group, standing subcommittee, but we realized we didn't need it, right? It was something that was created at one of the first meetings by Michael Weinbeck, and who said that it would be helpful. But we ended up finding out along the road that it wasn't actually super helpful, because we didn't need to constantly be revamping the rules and procedures of our own commission. I know Outreach Commission was mostly Commissioner Singleton and Commissioner Westphal. Policy and procedure, I know we did it. A lot of times was keeping track of, in our small committees, is where things were on in what we called the queue, right? All these things that we had earmarked from either stories from the community, because that's what happened in between meetings, right? In between each Tuesday meeting, I have 3 weeks of phone calls and emails and things that I'm seeing in St. Paul, seeing, okay, I'm sure this is happening in Minneapolis, right? Things on my radar. So it was a way to, at our meeting, make sure that this went on the queue, so that we as a commission didn't lose track on it. So that when, Director Jafar, you were just saying how one research and study came from another one, same thing with issues. And so policy procedure really focused on keeping track of all of that.
And then I think you're muted again, Manny.
And Jenny, I just asked you if you would like to weigh in, so you didn't even need me. So what were your experiences serving on a subcommittee?
Yeah, I think I served on all of these subcommittees, or committees as we renamed them in the Rules and Governance Committee. But that was where the heart of the work happened, where we would, with a smaller group, really be able to discuss like the nitty gritty of, okay, we're doing a study on domestic violence response. Like, what are the questions that we really need to get answered in this report? What are the like research questions? What are the specific things that we need to dive into? Who do we need to be talking to, and get into those details and do that kind of in-depth work, and then report back at the monthly PCOC meetings what work had been done at each of those committees, so that we were letting everybody else know where we were, and so that not everybody had to do the deep dive into every single project.
Mute.
Yeah, I'm just, it's been 5 hours of video meetings. I think my brain is turning off. My apologies. I think Chair Jackson and Casey Carl are actually working on the committee assignments as we speak right now. And if anybody would like to give an update, you are more than welcome.
Actually, yes. I had the opportunity to speak with our commissioners one-on-one through emails to ask about which committees they felt that they were most interested in, or that their skills would be best served. And we did come up with some committees. We've got Commissioner Sarah, and do I need to name them or just?
You're welcome to do whatever update you would like.
Okay, well, we did fully staff the Policy and Procedure Committee, the Audit Committee, and the Outreach Committee. What we had read was that the Rules and Governance Committee was now ad hoc. So I'm going to ask commissioners to volunteer should the need arise in the future for a Rules and Governance Committee. And there are 9 of us, and we have 3 standing committees. So we have 3 commissioners per committee now. We have, okay, my notes are really scrambled, so I'm going to try to do this real quick. We have Commissioner Sarah, Commissioner Abdi, and Commissioner Sylvester on Policy and Procedure. We have Commissioner Sparks, Commissioner Pinot, and Commissioner Crockett on Audit. And we have Commissioner Jacobson, Commissioner McGuire, and myself will be serving on the Outreach Committee. So once we complete our orientation and we get back to regular meetings next month, I will probably be asking each committee to start meeting weekly, decide what they want to work on, and then we'll come back at the next monthly meeting and discuss what we're doing. So it's great to hear how you guys went through this process, because I'm soaking everything in. I'm learning it. And I just, my hope is that we can really sink our teeth into some things and get some things done the same as you and Jenny did, Andrea. Like I'm really
I think you will. I mean, Jenny and I, we took the whole in one of our trainings, and I don't know if it's possible now during COVID, but one of our trainings, I mean, one of the simplest trainings is we went to, what was the hands-on, I don't know the name of it, Jenny probably knows the name of it, but it was that hands-on training that they were telling us how, they like peacefully arrest people. And one of the issues near and dear to my heart is ADA and wheelchair accessibility. My husband happens to be in a wheelchair. So when they explained to me how they arrest somebody in a wheelchair, not only did I yell at them, but I told them it was completely inappropriate. At that time, their thought was to handcuff somebody in a wheelchair, handcuff them to their wheels, because then they can't move. Now, you guys don't know me very well, but I went completely ballistic, and that is insane. I said, they need to change that now. There's no official document. Like, that's insane. And I'm surprised you haven't been sued yet. And then it was like, what was it, 2-3 months after we saw a couple of those complaints come in. So once again, it went on the queue, and it was a simple, I asked the director, I said, hey, has this been taken care of in the policy, in the training? So this is not being trained. I got a confirmation, yes, it's been taken out, boom, done. And then I reported at the next meeting, this has been taken care of. And so it just kind of goes back to my thing. You don't need the full big investigation for something. Sometimes things come up, and because we have a hybrid model, you can say, what's the data on this? What's the current policy? I mean, Jenny, how many times have there been, even when an incident happened, and not even a critical incident, but an incident, right? An incident happened, and my immediate response is, okay, hey, what's the data on this? What's the policy? Oh, you don't have one? Boom, here's one quickly for you, right?
Yeah, and just procedurally, like the way that reminded me the way that we handled things. I was trying to remember, like, how did this actually work? Is that when we were in the full PCOC meetings, and you all can of course adopt whatever makes sense for your commission, but we would say flag that as oh, that's an issue we want to look at more, and we would refer it to the Policy and Procedure Committee, the PMP committee. And then that committee during their next meeting would keep track of all of the issues that had come up previously. And they might request of the OPCR office some additional data about that particular issue, and basically figure out what is our plan of attack for this issue? Is this a full research and study? Is this, like Andrea said, something that we can have some conversations and make that change right away without a full research and study? And then if it was a full research and study, then it would get moved to the audit committee to shepherd it through the process of doing the full research project and coming up with the recommendations.
That's really helpful. And we've already kind of moved into the Q&A, so I'm going to invite Andrew, who's been really kind to run the slideshow, to take that down so they can see your faces a little bit better. But we thought this would be a great opportunity if any of the commissioners have questions for our PCOC alums here. You've taken in a lot of information. They are a wealth of information for you. So please, if you have questions, go ahead.
I'm kind of a gal that can't really think of the question right off the top of her head. So I would really appreciate the opportunity to speak with both of you individually, and then that way my questions will come to the fore. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
I see.
I'm happy for offline too, like I said. So
I see. Yeah, I think Commissioner Pinot has his hand up.
I do. Thank you. Well, first off, thank you both for spending your evening telling us about your time in the PCOC. I really appreciate it. And I think one of the initial things that both of you mentioned was that transition from the initial data points, whether it be the case summaries or someone coming in and telling you a story, into talking into, I think, what I would deem more, that statistical administrative data, and really starting to get a look at a bigger picture rather than just a data point or an anecdote, right? For me, and it's been a weird first year with me on the PCOC, but that has been a big stumbling block, in my opinion. Can you share, and you definitely shared the end result of that, of whether it be a research and study or a new policy recommendation or something. Would you be able in a sentence or two try to give either a highlight or your recommendation of how we go about getting to that next step from data point to really getting the data itself in a holistic view?
I think the thing that worked best for me personally was having a really good relationship with OPCR staff, because a lot of times it was just a conversation in committee about what is the data that you have available that we can actually get our hands on. Because sometimes we would be have these big dreams and it would just, that's not feasible. And so having those those conversations was really helpful to know what is the kind of data that we can get, what's the resource, how many resources does it take to get that data, within, you know, like OPCR just doesn't have as much staff as they should have. So like taking into consideration their staffing levels and their capacity. So kind of, it was just a conversation starting from what do we want to know to what data is available to what are we able to get our hands on to narrow down the scope of what the project would be about. And so sometimes it would evolve over time.
And I think it depends on Commissioner Pinnell what you're stuck on. Is your interest more each individual story, or is your interest kind of the macro, like how do we get the ground running on this compile of issues?
I'm definitely the latter. I actually get frustrated with being able to just look at 10, knowing that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of records, you know?
And I think that that's where you guys establish, and if you don't want to use the queue, I'm not going to be offended. I'm not going to like come to public comment and say, oh, you got rid of my queue, right? Do whatever works for you. But it's the interesting piece. Like Commissioner Pinnell, if you're, you know, for example, the HCMC, the ketamine study. I actually just did an interview out of New York with that because that's apparently a big issue in New York. They're just now finding that came organically from the ordinance, which requires our one person or your guys' one person to review body cams, right? And it's really keeping track of the patterns. I mean, that pattern, right? Because if it's one story, right? Because that's the thing, right? You hear prosecutors, you hear cops say, oh, it's just one person who's upset with this. And I hate that. So me coming back as a public defender and saying, no, not only do I see it every day in my job, but here's the proof. I have all of these, you know what I mean? And so it's that data piece is so huge. And what I always told the public is I'm not trying to be unsympathetic, right? You're sitting in my meeting and I am listening to you. It's not that I'm not hearing you, but I'm not asking questions because I need to take certain pieces from your story and be able to move it to the PNP or move it to the Aide, because we need to compare what we already have, right? Maybe this is the 100th one, so we can say, so OPCR can say, we finally, like, this is the one. We have compiled enough where we have, here you go, and let me present on it. So that transition to move. And so sometimes it's disappointing, right? You say, look, we don't have enough information on this issue. I mean, one of my biggest things was to always deal with the ADA, right? Because as of, I think it still says it right now. I don't know if we ever got to it, but at one point it said English as a second language was listed as a disability under the ADA under Minneapolis MPD policy. What? That makes no sense. I think we took care of that part, but we weren't able to dive into more of the ADA stuff that I wanted to, because I mean, unless you have a person in a wheelchair in your life, there's a lot of things that are not accessible, especially when dealing with police, right? So sometimes it just doesn't happen, but that's why you have to keep a queue or a tally or something. And if commissioners are going to keep, you know, coming in and out, that was the best way that we could come up with it. But it's really getting that data to kind of get the ball moving. And if there is no data, you know, there is no data. So now we got to find a way to keep it. So like, it's called I don't even know what it's called, the dashboard. I call it the Singleton model because that investigatory stop thing, I'm not kidding you. A call cannot be cleared now in Minneapolis, but for the Singleton model, like, but for that. And I know you hate that, Jenny, and I'm sorry, but I mean, really, like that demographic, that's huge, right? The perceived race versus the actual race. I love that as a public defender. You know what I mean? Because there's a very big difference between a 911 operator getting a call saying there are 3 black men on the corner that I have an issue with. And then they get there and guess what? It's not 3 black men. Now it's 3 Hispanic men. And now we have, or, you know, 3 Latino men. And now we have 3 Latino complaints coming in saying I'm being racially profiled. Well, now we can pull that and say, hey, the initial call was for 3 black males. Why is this squad even approaching these 3 Latino males? Right. So, but you don't get there, and it took 2 years, but you know, you don't get there until you're able to get that data. So some things you just can't, and that's why you earmark it, because you never know when that next story will come in that will be that catalyst for that subject.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you know, you're 100% right, because the eviction and calls for service study, I can tell you how many legal aid lawyers, I mean, went through that over a 30-year period trying to get that fixed. And it was fixed in, what would you guys say, 6 months?
Yeah.
Less than 6 months?
That was like
because
our
of
fast-
data collection. Yeah, it makes, because the anecdotal heartstring stories, I mean, they're horrible, but you can't take that one person in. I agree with that 100%. And that's, you know, part of the reason I shifted from doing direct client service work, whether it's criminal defense, housing work, into doing systemic work, because although I have my own frustrations with the system that those of you who know me that I'm happy to talk about, but there is also a benefit to trying to work within what you can get to push those boundaries. And if nobody does that, we're never going to change anything.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's also why I do legislative work, right? I've given this before, but maybe this will help some commissioners, and I don't know if I'm sure Dave and Chuck have heard me say this numerous times, but I don't believe you can take down a tower just by hitting it from the outside, right? You need people on the inside who are also trying to take down that tower. And that's kind of how I saw myself as the chair of PCOC, right? I'm keeping this neutral because both sides we need clear understanding, right? At some point, for whatever reason in society, we gave police officers all this power that they don't want and we don't want them to have, right? So now we got to take it away from them. But in the meantime, what do we do, right? In the meantime, I got to be working within the system that I have, changing it, but also knocking it down. And that's kind of really, I mean, we were busy and you do this for free. And so when you get discouraged and you're like, I'm doing all this work and nobody's listening to me and I'm frustrated, when you get those little wins, you know, unfortunately the staff is not big enough. You know what I mean? There's no Facebook group to say how great we did. There's no Twitter to be like, this is what we're doing, right? And because you're volunteers, you get burned out. So I totally get that. So I want to express, I know the meetings, I'm talking long, but I'm here because I want to be able to rejuvenate you, because this is what gets me geeked. I love this work.
Are there other questions? I don't see any hands up. Andrea and Jenny, thank you so much for your time. It was my pleasure to work with you too. I would say, and you know, I'm sure you would agree that I think we had a really positive working relationship together, and we figured out ways that you could be in your space and we could be in our space, but to bring those skill sets together to actually make real change. So it's just really nice to have you back. And I would encourage all the commissioners to take you up on being a resource. They have so much institutional knowledge from your seat. So please do take them up on that.
Yes, just remember that if you have an argument today, doesn't mean you still have the argument next time. That was a big lesson for me, because I'm not always going to agree with anybody, including, you know, my vice chair or the director. So that was a learning lesson for me. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was great to be back. Thanks for having us.
Of course.
I'm happy to chat anytime. Good to see you, Joel.
Yes.
And perfect segue. Joel is on deck with the city attorney's presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam's chairs, as it were, and commissioners. I'm going to really step on the gas for these last few topics, just because they're just meant to be kind of a high-level introduction to a few of these concepts that, as you know, we've already talked about in some past meetings, and about how complex, you know, data practices can be. But the overwhelming theme is just going to be that, you know, there are a lot of resources out there for you, the city clerk's office, my office, OPCR staff. It's kind of an issue spotting thing. If you think there might be something that could cause some sort of conundrum or put you in.
Joel, we need, sorry to interrupt. We need Andrew to put the PowerPoint back up. We can't.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Sorry, and I was going to ask that just logistically, if you would prefer that you saw him talking versus PowerPoint, but I'll get it up now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And I will kind of just throw it over to Casey after I think the first slide that we talk about in the partners portion of this just talks about my office and how our responsibility as it comes to or relates to the PCOC is to advise on legal matters as needed and appropriate, and that in terms of requests for kind of more formal or official city attorney office legal opinions, those usually are routed through the chair or through OPCR staff, and that's the way that it's been handled in the past, and it seems to work fairly well to do that. And I'll pass it over to Casey or Lisa then to kind of address the city clerk's side of things.
I'll just jump in to say for the city clerk's office, this is new for us, as I've said before, and we're learning with you all, but it's our role to provide that meeting management level support. So that's all your calendaring notices, agendas, minutes, things like that. And then sort of the general administrative support to ensure that the commission is able to function appropriately within the state laws, city charter codes, things like that. So Lisa will be your primary point person, but my whole office is also available through her, just like Joel is the point person from the attorney's office. But there is a stable full of very highly qualified and competent attorneys who back him up as well. So we're both partners to you in that exercise.
Definitely, and I think it's great for you guys that the city clerk's office is going to have a much more frontline involvement with your meetings. I mean, I work with them. I've worked with them for years, and all of their staff on various city council committees, and I mean, they really know what they're doing, and they can get things kind of when it's a big morass, they can straighten things out and get things on track, and that's really one of their purposes. And I think it works very well with. I think it's going to work very well with this commission. So with that, I'm just going to very quickly touch upon these three topics that we're required to bring up with you this evening: the open meeting law and the Data Practices Act, and then also the City Ethics Code. First of all, the first two topics are state level requirements. The open meeting law is found in Minnesota Statute 13D, and the Data Practices Act is also in Chapter 13. As you can see, the open meeting law has been around for quite a while. The way that I would distill it is simply to say that the main purposes of why there is an open meeting requirement is to allow open and accessible meetings, whether that's in person at City Hall or through this version, this online electronic version that we're doing now. And what that means is that the public needs to know, when and where or how to access these meetings. There needs to be agendas and schedules published. There needs to be notice given, or at least a regular agenda or regular meeting schedule adopted, which are things that are all happening and which all happen with the commission. And then finally, kind of the main purposes of that is to ensure that the decisions that are made on the policy matters in front of you are made in the open in these public meetings, and that the votes are taken and recorded there, and that the decisions aren't made, behind closed doors. And what that kind of naturally dovetails in, and you can probably flip to the next squad here, or next slide, is that the main modern age thing is that emails and texts are also going to play into that. And as you're aware, and I've met with the chair, and I know that you're aware that there aren't these electronic ways to subvert the open meeting law, and you still have to be careful with quorums. Having a quorum on an email chain is gonna implicate, or most likely implicate, the open meeting law, or violate the open meeting law in the same way as if you were gathered together at the end of a hallway and it wasn't a noticed meeting. But I think I get the sense that you're all very well aware of that. But I would just say that the open meeting law is administered by the Minnesota Department of Administration, which also administers the Data Practices Act. So if you are looking for kind of additional information, if you go on that website, in particular with the Data Practices Act, but also for the open meeting law, they have just a wealth of information and explanatory materials. And especially with the Data Practices Act, which we've got on the slide here now, and which I know that you're all aware is very complex. That what they have is a set of advisory opinions going back years and years that cover basically any topic within state and local government. And there's many advisory opinions that deal with civilian oversight, and Minneapolis civilian oversight in particular. Mr. Bicking's group, Communities United, has been at the forefront of some of that, some of those advisory opinions and some of the development of that law, whether it's through litigation or advisory opinions or just requests that they might have made along with other groups. And so it can be interesting to kind of look through some of that development and some of the things that have been had to been decided either by the Department of Administration or subsequently by the courts, and how that might affect some of the things that are public with regard to the data that you as a commission deal with. The main thing with the Data Practices Act is that the records can be classified as either public or not public, or confidential or private. There's a difference between private records and confidential records. Confidential records aren't subject to release to even the subject of the record, whereas a private record is subject to release to the subject of the record, but not to just a general member of the public. The city clerk is very involved with the Data Practices Act because they are designated as the responsible authority for the city, and they've done a great job in kind of streamlining and modernizing the process in which records can be requested. And so I think that's something that's helped very much with the processing of those requests. Casey, is there anything you wanted to say along the lines of the Data Practices Act or the work that your office does?
No, of course, any questions about any of these legal frameworks that govern you should first go to Joel. Mm-hmm. He is your attorney that was assigned to you. So as he's going over these things very quickly, know that he's always available if you have any questions or concerns, or especially specific issues. Joel's your first point of contact.
Yep, and Commissioner Brown, Chair Brown, there would be times, before a meeting, some question would come up dealing with, quorums or open meeting questions, and that's something where there'd be a discussion between the OPCR staff and my office, and those are the types of things that we can kind of jump into on a week-to-week or meeting-to-meeting basis if needed. And kind of the overriding theme I would have on this quick overview is that, if you think one of these requirements, these complex requirements, might be implicated or might have some kind of bearing on a new situation that's in front of you, by all means, ask the questions, and that's why you have the professional staff that is assigned to the commission. We can work through those complexities and get you to where you need to be and make sure that you're complying with the law, because these statutes do have potential enforcement avenues and penalties that can involve civil litigation, but it can also involve technically, a board member being removed from their appointment, or, even theoretically misdemeanor criminal prosecution. It's very rare that happens throughout the state, but you do certainly need to realize that these are state level statutory legal requirements that the city is bound and that you are bound to comply with. And so obviously it goes without saying that, you want to be extra careful with that and err on the side of kind of getting all the information and asking for professional opinions if you think that there might be some sort of implication or some sort of potential violation. The final topic that I'm here to kind of talk about is the ethics code. Now that's a local city level ordinance that was adopted in 2003, and it touches upon a whole host of topics. Some of the main ones are there's an ethical aspiration for the entirety of the city, but then it also talks about specific ethics categories such as fiduciary duty, conflicts of interest, soliciting or accepting gifts. That's just kind of a minor one that probably will present itself to you at some point. Basically any local official, and that's how you're categorized. If you look at the actual language of the ordinance, you as a board member are defined as a local official of Minneapolis, and so you're subject to the requirements, the ethics requirements. When it comes to the solicitation or acceptance of gifts, the general rule in the city is that you just can't do that. You can't solicit or accept any gifts. A lot of times people are well-meaning, or organizations might be well-meaning. There are some exceptions. If it's a trinket worth $5 or less, you can accept food if you're at a meeting that's off-site for which you're participating in your capacity as a local official. You can participate in the lunch that might be provided, or the refreshments. But other than that, that's a subject that is definitely covered very closely in that ethics code, and for which you'd want to be very careful in terms of if people are offering you things, as maybe even offering services to the commission. Now, there are definitely ways in which the city can accept things formally as gifts, or accept services of a consultant that might be that might be put out there, but those can be complex analysis as well. So that would definitely be something you'd want to bring up, and we could try to work through that and make sure that, you know, the city's doing the right thing and that you're doing the right thing by the code that you're required to comply by. The good news about the ethics requirement is, as it kind of says on the bottom of that last slide there is an ethics, I guess, office or an officer within the city attorney's office. Susan Trammell is the primary attorney that works in that area, but there's also a very well thought out and well developed section of the public or the internal website in which you can ask questions, you can make complaints, or the public can make complaints. There are forms that can be sent in. I would encourage you to kind of look at the ethics section of the public website and see all of the resources there. And then the main thing is to remember is that we do have a dedicated ethics officer, and you do have the services of my office and the professional staff that works with you that would be more than happy to kind of work through any issues that might come up. I was kind of going down the laundry list of some of the other major categories in that ethics code, and it talks about outside employment and use of city property and resources and disclosure of non-public information. Those are kind of the main highlights that are in that ethics code. But with that, those are the three main topics that I wanted to just give you the kind of the brief highlight on, recognizing that I think the discussion you had earlier in this orientation has been the real valuable part, and so I didn't want to take up too much of your time. Obviously, if you do have any questions right now, I'd be more than happy to address them, but the main, I think, takeaway would be if any of these subjects are something that you think is causing you any kind of concern or something that's presenting to you, let's have a discussion and try to work through things on a case-by-case basis.
And if there, I'll just jump in here, Joel. If there are no questions for Mr. Fussy, then I think that completes our presentation. I'll turn it back to Mr. Hawkins for any final wrap up. But I believe that completes our portion of the presentation, and we would turn it over back to you, Madam Chair, to facilitate the remainder of the meeting, unless Mr. Hawkins, you tell me otherwise.
Nope, that is all we had for this evening.
Madam Chair.
Whoops. Commissioner Pineau.
Just want to state for the audience who does not have access to our chat, it looks like Miss Heidi Ritchie posted a link to a document, Alternatives to Police Response Work, RCA-2001-00091. If the chair is willing, would it be possible to direct staff to reach out to Miss Ritchie regarding that document? I do believe she posted it in response to, in the same subject matter as the co-responder model, and it might be of interest to the PCOC in a future meeting.
Yes, I'm amenable to that. Thank you, Commissioner Pineau, for making that suggestion. So Andrew, you said, Mr. Hawkins, you have nothing further for us?
That's correct. That concludes our presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I'd like to thank all of the staff and all my colleagues on this commission for this orientation tonight. As I stated in the beginning, I really want this to be the beginning of a new chapter in the history of this commission and of meaningful community oversight and partnership with our elected officials and our police department. I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to dig in on improvements to process and how we perform, but I think this is a good start. So we have just maybe another item or two of unfinished business. Actually, the only other item of business that we still have before us to decide are the three cases we want to have presented at our next meeting, which will be on March the 9th. And I really appreciate everyone getting back to me with your thoughts and the cases that you were looking at. And we actually came to a unanimous decision on one case. That was case number 9. And the other two were cases number 3 and number 8. So does anyone have any discussion about these selections? Casey or Andrew, if you have that handy, would you be able to pull up the 10 so that we can review the 3 that I just named, 3, 8, and 9? We could just go over them once more. If you don't, that's okay. I mean, we all individually have them. But I thought it might be good to have it up on the screen so that we can see it.
It would just take me a moment, Madam Chair. I've got to search through my emails really quick.
Okay. Oh goodness, can y'all hear my daughters in the living room? They're getting a little loud. No, kinda? Okay, let me shut my door. Okay, thank you. Here we have, okay, case number 3, case number 8, and case number 9. So, would anyone like to discuss anything about this, or kind of have we already put our thoughts together about this? Commissioner Jacobson.
I think one of the reasons why these cases appeal to me is because I notice a lot of it has to do with character. We're talking about the character of our officers making the arrest or interacting with our Minneapolis constituents. It's how they view the public, and it definitely says something about what's going through that officer's head, how he feels about the person he's interacting with, how he feels about the culture he's interacting with. That's basically why they appeal to me, and that signifies that we have a bigger problem, because when you're looking at the character of the person who is hired to do a job, that is significant.
I would agree. I think that integrity is one of the main ingredients to being charged with the power that police officers are invested, and the way that they interact with community members kind of highlights a lack of that. Anybody else have anything about these cases?
Chair Jackson, if you don't mind, I just want to add to where I'm going at with this is we're not just looking at training. Character starts at the base of hiring. And so that's something that we might need to dive deeper into as we participate in some of these policy changes that we want to push forward. It starts with hiring. It starts with hiring people from your community. It starts with hiring people who have ethics. That's all at the hands of our backgrounders at our police departments, our psychologists that do the psych evals of our police officers. It starts there. And I think that's where we need to start looking. Is some of these behaviors that should be red flags, are they just getting passed through because the need of the officers? Or are they just being passed through because what the faces of the officers look like, the backgrounds of the officers, how long they've been in the police department?
Also, another aspect could be, is that favorable to the culture of our police departments? So if no other commissioner has any points that they would like to discuss or remark, then we're agreed on these 3. We'll direct the staff to prepare summaries for these cases, and we'll present them at the March 9th meeting. I don't need a motion for that. Do I need a motion for this?
No, Madam Chair, just directing the staff is fine as you just did.
Okay, great. So does anyone have anything else to say, or anything we forgot? Anything at all? Going once,
Commissioner
twice.
Jackson?
Yes.
I have a question. Are we going to be able to, like, once we get the additional information about the cases that we picked out, are we going to have a discussion at our next meeting?
Yes. Yes,
Okay,
that's
perfect.
what we'll do. Yes, and I see that you have your hand up, Casey.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Before the meeting was over, I wanted to take just a quick chance. I don't want to belabor the point, but to your credit, and I know you said several times, sort of level setting and restarting with the PCOC. I wanted to express my appreciation, obviously to my staff colleagues, but especially to you and to the Vice Chair who spent time with us reviewing and preparing for tonight, and really making sure that we were thoughtful in our work as staff to come forward with sort of this holistic approach. I really want to thank Director Jafar and Mr. Hawkins especially for all of their time in putting that together as well. But it really was led and shaped by the chair and vice chair, and I think there was a lot of thought and intention behind that. So I wanted to thank you for doing that for us and providing tonight as a starting point. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I would also like to echo the thanks to the city staff and to Vice Chair Abdi. We did have a very robust discussion about our orientation tonight, what would be included and who would be speaking. And it was a great opportunity for us, Chair or Vice Chair Abdi and myself, to get some additional information, about the PCOC, its formation, what our purpose is, what we can do, the avenues that we can follow, and what we can ask of the Office of Police Conduct Review. So it was very enlightening and I enjoyed it. And thank you, Casey and Andrew and Imani, for inviting us to participate in that. With that, we have concluded all the items on our agenda tonight. So I will see everybody back here for next month for the March 9th regular meeting. And if there is no further business without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening. We'll see you on March the 9th.
Thank you.
All righty.